and had you read Weight Loss Apocalypse. And when did you read that?
Maybe 2 or 3 months ago.
Okay, so you are okay. So you are
first round.
Got it. Oh my God, you are so awesome, by the way, to reach out so quickly. So many people don't reach out. I think it has a lot to do with just the fact that it's overwhelming, all the stuff I have out there, and they think I'm a little bit of a bitch. But anyways, some people will just sit.
Well, I just love that about you.
Well, it's not against you. It's really just calling out some of the brainwashing that you're not questioning. You think it's the right thing to do, or kind of you're holding on to something that has a lot of negative. There's some positive things you get out of it, but then it becomes negative eventually. But if you aren't willing to look at it with an open mind, you're eventually something that initially benefited you can eventually cause harm. And if you're not willing to let it go, it's kind of hard to recover, right? So, okay. So we were talking about survival mode because you were saying, you got divorced, you were in a marriage, and it was an unhappy marriage, I take it. And you got up to food was your way you compensated yourself for the misery. You know, your payoff for being in a miserable marriage was food. You got up to 270 pounds. Did I get that right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I know there's all more detail, but you recovered, you got divorced, you've gotten some help. You haven't binged in 2 years, which is awesome. You really don't emotionally eat very rarely, only like vacation mode type of things. You did the HCG protocol, just got off a round. How many times have you done HCG?
So I just got off my 3rd round, but the first round was about 7 years ago. So
okay, got it.
Right now, like this year, 2 rounds.
Okay, so first round was 7 years ago. So did you notice your first round afterwards your binge eating got worse?
No.
Okay, that's okay.
No. I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, because I see it make a lot of people's issues significantly worse. But it might have made you obsessed with your weight more than it goes both directions for a lot of people. So now you're just coming off a round. Okay, so we were talking about survival mode because you were like your daily weighing. And I was like, oh, that sucks. That's really shitty. And I was trying to explain, oh, well, that's kind of a sign you're in fight or flight, especially with your weight.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because that type of balance, what weighing does and why it's beneficial, and because I'd said, well, yeah, you're benefiting from it only because you're stressed out of your mind, out of your gourd, and it gives you a sense of like being in control, right? It gives you something to monitor, and that's really easing the part of the brain that is in fight or flight. And it's very specific. You had said, well, yeah, I'm stressed out. I'm a single mom now. I own my own business, all of those things. And those are also important. But when it comes to your food, okay, and your weight, that's what I'm talking about. You're in fight or flight or in survival mode around your weight, okay, and that projects into your food, right? There's more than that. That's just one angle. Another angle is if you're under stress and your food, let's just say you're trying to control your life by controlling food, your weight is like a way to feel rewarded. So by maintaining weight or losing weight, it's a way to feel rewarded when you feel restricted. I don't know if that's your case, but I see that a lot where I'm restricting, I feel restricted, my life is chaotic, and it's hard, and I'm having a hard time maintaining this restriction. I need the weight loss to keep me motivated. Could you see that?
I can see it. I kind of feel more like I'm doing this because I want to be around for my grandchildren, and I've got some health risks. And
okay,
so
put that right there. We need to move away from this conversation because that is like you're living. There's some there's some things you're bringing into this conversation that are kind of out. I'm not saying they're not important, but that right there, I don't want to include that in this conversation right now. Okay, right now, because that's how we convince ourselves this is healthy. And so that's I hear what you're saying. That to me is like, well, of course, there's probably more. I knew I would have known. Those are things that I know exist prior to someone talking to me. Everybody comes in and says I have to do this for my health, right? And there is a sense of like ownership and in making sure this is important to me and because I want to be here. Well, that statement was fed to you by the diet industry, and that's been feeding into the culture since the early after World War II. The whole concept of fearing disease to sell product, to sell nutrition, to sell pharmaceuticals, to sell shaky machines, to sell all sorts of stuff. That's part of what that is. Okay, because you could say right here in this moment in your present, and you're associating it, I'm assuming, to body fat, right? Not to stress, not to your obsessiveness with your weight, right? You're not connecting those as not healthy. You know what I'm saying?
No, I was kind of more connecting it to hormonal imbalance and
okay,
diabetes
so
and things
well,
like that.
yeah, and you know that your stress is actually more a cause of diabetes than fat.
Yeah, the cortisol. Yeah.
Yes, so it has nothing to do with your fat. It has more to do with stress. I had diabetes for a good period of time after I was moving 5 times. I just moved 5 times in 5 years, got blood work done, and I was super freaking diabetic. If you look at actual stress and how the body works, you're supposed to be diabetic under stress. That's how the body works. It goes through gluconeogenesis through the stress pathway from the brain, right? Mm-hmm. So that's actually to some degree a good thing. The problem is when it becomes chronic. Then it's not good, right? So big picture here, remove your weight from the cause, because that's not the cause. So going back into stress, right? So a lot of people think, oh, I need to lose weight for my health. And it's like, oh my God, they've been brainwashed. The stress of restricting food is far more problematic. Okay. So this is where it is interesting. And I'm going to give you a little bit of just the science behind it. And I want you to know that there's actually a lot of science around this, but you're never, ever going to hear it from the diet industry that sells diets. You will never, ever hear this from an industry.
So you have links to this?
Oh, you just go into Google and do Google. I'm not going to send you a bunch of links. I have so much research around it, but it's not my research. It's like journals. You'd have to get out of the diet industry and the fear mongering of disease with obesity to see it all. There's so much social science looking at this as a social epidemic, that this has a lot to do with the diet industry and how they position you to be in fear and fight or flight with food, which is the most primitive part of our survival mechanisms. So it's the most inflammatory. Right? Because if you don't have food or you don't feel safe with food, don't you agree? That's kind of the biggest environmental threat to life.
Especially considering the culture around food that we have.
Well, exactly. And that's what they found is you have this entire group, a massive amount of people who are dieting, not realizing that that's causing the inflammation. And then they're surrounded by food. And so you're taking we're primitive animals. So our brains did not evolve around masses of food. It evolved around famine. Cyclical famine, right? And so you look at how we are responding. Think of it this way. Do you know what a third world country is? Versus a first world country. Okay.
Yeah.
So take people who are in a third world environment, bring them here and tell them they can't eat, but have them watch everybody else eating. How's that going to impact their psyche around food?
Well, that's not a rhetorical question.
Well, how's it going to
I'm
impact
sorry,
their
I was just
psyche?
watching it impact it. It's going to make them go crazy.
Yes, so we have like 30% of our country at any given time is trying to restrict food while food is abundant everywhere.
Yeah, so like as I'm driving down the road, and this is a memory from when I was, that heavy, and actually I had gallbladder disease, and I couldn't eat anything. Watermelon was giving me a gallbladder attack,
Yeah.
And I was feeling like I am not part of this. I'm outside of this.
Correct. How's that feel?
I'm not even. Yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, you go into yes, and that psychologically is very triggering to hoard, to get, to defend yourself, because it almost feels like you're being withheld. It's a withholding. It's very different than actual famine. With famine, there's no choice, and everybody is having to survive. And you actually, you're the way you think about it changes because you're more in gratitude. I have to preserve my food. But if you are restricting your food, but yet everybody else can have it, it can feel as if it's like being attacked. I'm being withheld instead of, this is how we have to live. We can manage this. I can survive this. When you're around abundance and you're not participating, it feels disconnecting. And in a way, that can feel, so that's like being attacked. Like it's unfair. They get it, I don't. Right? So that's just one aspect of how this is inflaming your brain. Okay? Don't forget the fear mongering, bad food. This is bad. Do you know how much advertisements, let's just say go through social media, that say 5 foods that cause cancer? And then when you read the article, they don't discuss you have to eat this food in mass quantities every time you eat for 3 months straight or for 5 years straight. They don't decipher that. They just say this is bad food because the article was written by someone who's orthorexic. I don't know. Do you know what that is? Orthorexia is an eating disorder that is around the obsessive compulsiveness. It's obsessive narcissistic compulsiveness around the purity and the safety of food. So it's someone who is really self-righteous around their nutrition and their food being healthy, like religious supremacy. Okay. So the person that wrote the article is an orthorexic.
Okay.
So they have this. They're distorted, and they're distorting the article. Like if you have 1 bag of Cheetos, you're gonna have cancer. You should never feed those to your kids. That type of cognitive distortion is like saying, you should never ever, go to a dance because you could dance too sexy and be prone to having sex. You know what I'm saying? Okay. They're distorted. Okay. Anyway, so what does that do when food is being feared as a life and death threat? I want you to go back to the primitive. If someone said there's this berry and it's blue and it'll kill you if you eat it, what happens when you're out and about foraging?
You don't eat any of the blue berries.
You're not only that, but you're freaked out about everything, and your kids will look at you and you're like, don't eat any blueberries. So it's
what if I touch the
yeah, if I touch it, what if we smell it? And then so it's inflammatory. It's like fight or flight with food. So that's kind of like these are some examples. Those are just examples of how that can work. But let's talk about where the foundation of this science comes from. So about 50, 60 years ago, Maslow. Have you ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay, so he basically studied human behavior and human motivation, and the foundation of he's a huge founder of this newer movement called evolutionary psychology. Okay, how we evolved not just to have hands and eyes in front of our face and wear ears and all of that physical evolutionary stuff, right? But how we evolved psychologically. And what he theorized is that we are wired to prioritize psychologically in our awareness certain things, and we prioritize these things before other things that are necessary. And so he tried to create kind of a pyramid to describe this prioritization. And what he found is that humans at our very most important foundation that we are all wired to really obsess about until it's met is the foundation of our psychology is wired to prioritize above everything else food and water, because those are physiologically necessary, right? You will die without food and water. So it is the most relevant threat to life and death, right? Food and water. So that, if you look at it, that is the base of our psychology, what we're wired to prioritize. Okay. The second step up, not as important, but just as important, is environmental safety, right? Shelter, healthcare, making sure that your kids are wearing the right, like if it's freezing out, we want to know what's appropriate to protect our skin and our bodies, because that's a threat. Okay. So environmental safety. So the first foundation is the physiological safety. The next is environmental safety. And the third level up would be our tribal pack animal needs. So we are wired to want to feel lovable as humans. What that does, if we feel valuable in ourselves, it means that we are more safe in a tribe, in a pack, because we're pack animals, right? And so, once you're safe with food and you're safe in your environment, you're going to be more energized to want to work with other people. But if you don't feel safe in your home and your food, it's kind of hard to socialize, right? Your brain is too fixated on trying to secure your food in your home. And you can't function socially as well, right? So that's kind of what he found, is that when people they don't feel that they can just survive their own physical survival, it's very hard for them to function in society. Right? And so, and he kept on going, but there's been a lot of changes to his hierarchy. They found that he thought sex was at the bottom. It's actually further up. We don't have to have sex. And it's actually something that comes more often when you have the security of your environment, of your home or your tribal environment. So there's been some changes to modernize it, but in general, so when you people have looked at that first hierarchy of need specific to food, and what they found is where we are all striving to feel secure with food and safe. So it's a safety and security with food. So security would be that we have access to food, that we have enough food, that we can get more, that we have the ability to get more. So not just what we have, but we have access to more. We want to feel that we have a lot of food beneath us, if that makes sense, which is part of why we can and why we preserve food and why it's super important, right? But it's not just that, so it's, do I have access to food? Do I have enough food? Can I get more? Can I get more? Those are important, but also, is it safe? So if we perceive that food isn't safe, your brain's going to go crazy. If you perceive that you don't have enough, you're about to go crazy. If you perceive that you can't get more, you're about to go crazy, right?
Okay.
So you hear how those things might be impacting your fight or flight response. Yeah, it's a big deal. And it's not just a tiny aspect of psychology. It is the foundation of psychology, of our behavior. The foundation. So when you look at 30% of the country right now implementing a form of restriction, while food is everywhere. And not only that, but you can look at their restriction and go, they're more than likely being fear-mongered and saying that's bad food, you can't eat it, it's going to kill you. Like, just go into how how it's being approached. Can you see how that might create insane inflammation not just, well, physiologically, because your brain is triggering cortisol. I mean, it's a fight or flight response, and it's a significant one, right? To where if you look at the compensation around that, so when that 30% can't do it anymore and they break the rules, what do you think they're going to do next?
You mean after they...
Yeah, after, like, when they're done dieting, when they're done implementing their restriction and they're kind of like bad food, I'm controlling my food, what do you think is the natural thing for them to do?
They're going to reward themselves for doing it by overeating and gaining the weight back.
Yeah, and what do you think happens when they convince themselves they're going to go back into the famine? What happens the moment they give themselves that food, when they are committed to going back into famine?
Fear, and the body just... I mean, in my situation anyway, my body just went, you fuck that. I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm going to eat whatever I want.
Yeah, because I'm
afraid that you're going to do that to me again.
Correct. It's not just that, but it's also your psychological behavior is, well, I've got to restrict later, or I've got to keep on restricting. So you're giving yourself a temporary moment of abundance, knowing that restriction. So you're living in a continuous state of famine, psychological famine. Even though you're eating the food, you're actually saying, screw it, I'm eating. Your psychology is in a state of famine. So the 30% of the United States that's trying to lose weight right now, they're not only becoming physiologically more sensitive to food, but psychologically they're going to be more impulsive to overeat. Naturally.
Okay, so right now, so the thing that's coming up in my head is listening to that video of you talking about leptin and talking about how people with lower body fat need more food, and watching my brain go, oh, if I lose all this weight, I can actually eat more food.
Well, who knows? Because if you're inflamed, so that's just one aspect. That was just one aspect of this idea around body fat and how it impacts your hunger. Well, what if they're in fight or flight? What if this person, like myself, is going to move 5 times in 5 years? I mean, that's triggering the environmental inflammation, yeah. Right? So just because I'm lean doesn't mean I'm inflaming my body through the brain. So it's like taking HCG even though I'm lean. I'm inflaming my body through this environmental circumstance of moving. If I just, so I wasn't very hungry. So your hunger changes not just on body fat. Your menstrual cycle can change it. You travel. Changing pressure gradients can change it. So it's like, not only is it just how much fat you have, but it's your environment, the lack of sleep. So someone who's lean, who doesn't sleep very well or is sleeping too much, can have that change everything. I mean, so it's not just body fat. It's a huge picture. Again, add to this someone who is inflamed because they are afraid to gain weight and have to restrict food. So this brings us to the third hierarchy of need, which was the tribal kind of desire to feel lovable. We all have this feeling of, I want to feel lovable and I want to be loved and be loved. And really what we're seeking intrinsically is a sense of we are valued. I'm going to say that again. We are seeking a sense of I have value. I have value. We want to feel that within ourselves. If you don't feel it within yourself, you're going to seek it outside of yourself. And that statement would be, I want to be valued. Our goal is to feel we are valuable. If you don't feel that intrinsically, the next thing would say, well, I want to be valued. That means I need to be validated to fulfill the sense of I am valuable. So people who don't feel intrinsically valuable tend to be continuously seeking, out of survival, validation. And so they will go outside of themselves to prove I have value, but it's not necessarily intrinsic, it's extrinsic. It's like saying I'm now valuable because I'm thin. That's extrinsic. That's not intrinsic. That's a physicality. It's like saying my eyelashes are longer and I feel more valuable. That's not real. That's an illusion. It's fake, right? It's like saying I drive nicer cars, so therefore I'm valuable. That's not really intrinsic value. That's you're just accommodating to a system to be liked within the system, right? You could say there's a lot of that. I parallel it to the religious industry, where if I am this religion, I am now valuable. God thinks I'm valuable. You're still not intrinsically valued. Does that make sense? So this is where there is a massive system. It's a program. It's a cultural program that is monetizing hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars on you will be lovable when you're thinner. Right? And so what's happening is you're taking that third hierarchy of need and saying, well, I want to feel that I am lovable, but I will feel that when I'm thinner. Therefore, I have to restrict food. So do you see how you're taking two survival mechanisms and inflaming them both? So this whole concept, the problem is like the upper third one is basically holding hostage the first one, which is way bigger and way more influential in terms of your behavior. The first one being food. So in order for me to be loved, I have to be thinner, which requires I restrict food. I have to stay in famine. I have to continuously monitor my food. I have to keep my food under, I have to be in famine. I have to constantly focus. And so can you see where it's kind of a loop. You're going to go around in circles psychologically because you're wanting to fulfill this first need or the third need of survival, which is I want to feel valued, by threatening the most important need, which is food. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it? And so it's like you're basically have Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
Which is
I'm gonna get a lot of mileage out of that. I think that's really gonna be helpful to me.
Yeah, well, because it might help you explain how crazy this is. One, why you need to obsessively weigh yourself. Well, because you're actually trying.
I know it's crazy. I just don't know why it's crazy.
Well, because with the weighing, and this brings us back to the daily weighing, and why I went, oh, that sucks so bad. Because it does. It's because you're trying to get rewarded for this inflammation around restricting food. It's trying to balance it out, that there's a purpose, there's a reason. I need something to make it, I need help to keep me motivated. Right? If you don't lose the weight or if it gains, you're going to have a fight or flight response, which is crazy. So you're responding to your weight as if it's a bear, as if it's, then you got to go back in to micromanage your food, which makes things somewhat worse sometimes. Some people find a balance between how they're eating and their weight, but they're still obsessed over it. It's still like a major aspect of their thoughts during the day. They might not be thinking about it 90% of the day, but they're at least thinking about 50% of the day, which is still miserable.
Yeah.
But think about your life. Is this what you're supposed to be? Is this what everybody should be thinking about? Their lives is about how thin they are, and if how's the body doing? You lose your life.
Yeah.
That's what happens. Is you're trying to find life by threatening it. It's just a bizarre backwards. You think you're going to get freedom by doing what you're doing, but doing what you're doing is essentially removing all your freedom.
It's imprisoning you.
Yeah, it's a trap. That's what a lot of people reference it as, a trap. You go into it thinking, this is going to give me freedom. Once I get there, I will be free to be myself, to focus on other things, to really be that creative, curious human we're born to be. It's like reaching survival, but you're doing it through means that threaten your survival physiologically.
Yeah, I've heard myself think that many times.
I know, right? You wouldn't be calling me. We wouldn't be talking if you hadn't. Right? I will be free. I will feel better. It's like a destination. problem is the illusion or the fantasy is that when you reach that destination, that the doors, pearly gates will open like it is a destination. Like you get there and everything is going to be amazing, right? But the problem is it's a mirage. So you never really get there. And what you're doing, okay, to get there, once you get there, you can't stop. So it's the whole thing is a fantasy. Because you could get thinner, you could reach a thinner state, you could be quote unquote healthier. And I put quotes around that because psychologically you're in dark places. It's not good. Okay. It's an illusion of being healthy. But it doesn't go away. So the fantasy is when I'm thinner, it's like reaching a destination and I have freedom. Well, the problem is that you have to keep on doing what you're doing permanently and you don't get your freedom ever. Because you can't stop what you're doing. If you stop what you're doing, what's going to happen to the body?
Well, historically, it's going to gain weight again.
Yeah, it is. If you stop what you're doing. So whatever you're doing, whether it's 2 hours of cardio every day, micromanaging your macros, which is an obsessive compulsive problem, literally obsessing over what's in food and what's not in food and making that, that takes over your entire focus. If you stop doing that, just what does your fear tell you is going to happen to your body?
It's going to balloon.
And what else? There's all sorts of fears in there. It's not just the balloon. There's all the fear. There's tons of fear conversations in that. So you're kind of trapped. You can't stop what you're doing because you're trapped by your fear. So hear the survival mode in that? Like we're talking animal, shifty-eyed survival mode. It's fear-based. Right? And so the fear doesn't go away. The fear stays there. It just requires now a massive amount of work just to be neutral. You don't even get benefit out of it. It's just your benefit is neutrality. Like I like to describe it. It's like I'm training for the Olympics, but the race never ends. So I don't get the Olympics to say I did it. I'm just doing it permanently now. And it is like training for the Olympics because the amount of work involved is like, it's insane. It's like you wouldn't want that for your worst enemy. It's like being an indentured servant. This might be more. I don't know if this is describing what you're in or what you've ever experienced in your past.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's horrible. You see what I mean when you said, yeah, I'm daily weighing, and I was like, oh God.
Well, that's
part of the protocol, but can you see why I don't recommend it?
It's part of the protocol, and when I'm not on the protocol, I don't daily weigh.
Yeah. So what happens when you?
And I find that I can maintain just fine, but I can't lose, and of course I still want to do that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't feel like, and my doctor doesn't feel like I'm at a healthy weight yet. I'm close. I'm close.
Yeah. Well, that destination doesn't exist because you're actually at a healthy weight. Problem when a doctor talks about weight as if it's unhealthy is they're just not up to date on their studies, and they're emotionalizing it too. They're probably fear mongering it. There's so much more to your weight is healthy. In fact, we could look at you at 270 pounds and look at the body and the environment that it was in going, wow, the body is kicking ass right now. When you were 270, it was kicking ass based on what was being done to it.
Well, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you should because it's true.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can argue that.
Yeah.
If
it
was bionic.
It was keeping me walking around, and it was keeping me doing all the things I needed to do as a mom.
And way more than that. It was managing abuse. It was being abused, right?
Yeah.
So it's beyond that.
Yeah.
It's doing far more. And so you could look at it now and go, well, why is this unhealthy? Especially when I'm still, to some degree, abusing it on the other side. right? If I'm under eating, if I'm putting it under this type of fight or flight stress, specifically with food, imagine how that impacts your entire endocrine system. So the balance.
Well, I'm trying not to. I'm not under eating at this point, but I'm also not overeating. And I'm really, really like trying to learn how to use the eat to hunger.
Yeah. Well, that's really difficult.
I love it. I love that, Robin. Yeah. I love it so much. Can I just tell you that?
It's so well. It's like no duh, right? It's like what?
I know it seems so simple. When
right
you said it, I was like, face. What? That's too easy.
It is. And it's kind of like going pee. Why would you sit on the toilet if you don't have the sense of needing to go to the bathroom? You wait till you need to go pee. It's like that. And it's like, but what happens, the problem when someone has this type of body image inflammation, okay, that pack animal body image, and also the sense that you're going to die because of the fat. I mean, that type of fear mongering is so fucked up. When you bring that to the hunger scale, it doesn't work because it doesn't match people who are inflamed. It's not a good balance. Mm-hmm. It will not work, and you'll be stressed out about it and have anxiety with the hunger scale. So the hunger scale, as I've described it and how I wrote about it in Weight Loss Apocalypse, that is written as if you don't have this type of inflammation. The problem is, how many people do you think come to it with massive amounts of inflammation? Psychologically.
Well, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them come to it because of that.
Correct. And so I rarely see it work because of that. You're too stressed out around your weight. It's too laid back, right? And so people have a lot of anxiety around it. They become too perfectionistic around it because they're trying to survive eating to hunger, and it's very difficult. So when people come to me and they're like, okay, is it like a 4.25 or a 4.5? I'm just like, holy shit, you need mental work. We need to work on your other shit first. This isn't going to work. And then they're weighing themselves, trying to hold that maybe if I eat to hunger, I can lose my weight. And it's just like, oh my God, they just distorted it into another diet. And it's not meant to be that. And it won't work. It doesn't work because now you're super inflamed, tiptoeing around food as if it's so damaging. I have to eat perfectly to hunger. So, yeah, I mean, it's idealistic, which is what I wrote in Weight Loss Apocalypse. That's the ideal. That's when you got someone that doesn't have body image issues. They have forgiven a lot of their issues. They've gotten help. They don't have the same desperate fear need to fix the body. They have more faith in the body, Part of the problem is we have a massive industry that is making a shit ton of money telling you the body can't function on its own.
Oh, yeah. Well, I never bought that.
Well, you're buying into it.
Well,
with what you've been saying.
In some ways, but I've
be honest with yourself.
The body is much more intelligent than.
Yeah, like the 270-pound body you were in was like the 270-pound body you've had. That's an A+ body. That's like bionic. That's like AP credit body. So the diet industry and the quote unquote health industry would never want you to see it like that because your body is failing and it needs help because you're gonna die. Like the body's going to kill you. The one body that's giving you life and fighting the environment and doing everything is going to kill you. What they're telling you to do is going to kill you. Cause more inflammation. It's actually causing more hardship for the body, Mm-hmm. And in the long run, there's terrible consequences to it. Psychological terrible consequences. Either way, you could look at this whole thing. Look at the whole thing and go, this whole thing was founded on some major issues that I needed to deal with as a kid. And the rest of this is like a huge distraction or a way for me to try to compensate for feeling like I'm a failure. I feel like a piece of shit. And all of this I'm using to not feel that way. So look at the bigger picture right now. Look at the history. Not just what I'm telling you right now, but look at pre-marriage, pre-270. Look at the whole thing and what you're using body image to. And body image isn't just the way you look. It's how you relate to the body in relation to what you think it should be or how you identify with it. you know. So you have an identity. You know, you have a name and you have a concept of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my name is Robin. So I have a name, you know. I'm a girl. So I'm female. You know, we have this overall sense of who I am. And a lot of people who have these issues have an identity with the body in their mind. And then what they actually have with the body doesn't match. So there's a mental image of who you are, and then there's a reality of the body. And you have to really look at, well, what does the body have to do with who I am? Why is there an image? Why does it have an image? You know, what if the image doesn't matter? You know, that's something to really look at.
Well, okay.
I know. So I'm trying to give you kind of like little bits to understand, okay, well, you have all this stuff. What I need you to look at is what's underneath it all. What's underneath it all? What are you trying to feel better about? Is it dating? You know, look at what's promoting this, what you're doing. First thing you said is this idea of health, right? So we could say there's fear of disease. There's fear-based. It's fear-based. Because you may not.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay, so mine's tied up a little bit in my career. Like, if I look like I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it?
Then my career gets to continue. And I've had people tell me, you know.
Well, of course.
You can't be telling people nutrition things. You can't be telling people what to eat because you're fat.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
No, really, that's hilarious. Like, it's a fat. What does fat have to do with nutrition? It's not again, nutrition. Go back to what that means. That means vitamins and minerals.
Right.
And not only that, but that's stigma. That's the stigma of thin. That's. Have you ever heard any of the sessions where I talk about thin supremacy?
No.
Well, it is what it is. What I just said. Thinner people are superior people. Fat people are inferior.
Okay.
So yeah.
No, that's absolutely the program that's out there. So,
you see it. It's like you took a second. You're like, holy hot damn! She's right. It is thin supremacy, and they're saying basically I have to be thin to have any. Like, what are you not white enough? Am I not? What you know what I'm saying? It's the same disgusting belief system, right? It's disgusting. That's why I was laughing. I was like, oh my God, yeah, there's the thin supremacy right there. You can't work in this industry unless you're thin. Because thin people are superior and they're smarter and they're just higher quality people. They have more credibility. Yeah. Isn't that terrible?
Really?
It's terrible. That's just disgusting. But that program, remember when I said there's a big program out there? It is a social system that is profiting. We're talking huge profiting on stigmatizing people who have more body fat, making them feel, not making them feel, but the whole concept is that fat people are lazy, uneducated, they have mental problems, that they are just lesser human beings. There's something wrong with them. They're failures. It's terrible. And it's huge money. It's not true, but it's true that it's a system.
No.
Yeah.
It's true that that's the system.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's true that it's true.
Yeah. Well, you're coming from someone who's been stigmatized. It sucks. I'm talking to someone who's been stigmatized. You've been judged that way, and it's wrong. It's absolutely disgusting. You know?
Well, and I was able to piece together that it was wrong because I was large, and yet I'm intelligent. People like me. I'm capable of doing anything I set my mind to. So if that's true for me, then it must be true for anyone else. Even when I was 270 pounds.
Of course.
When, my patient comes to me and she's lost 300 pounds and she's still 300 pounds, and I'm like, holy crap, woman, you're a warrior. That's amazing.
Well, because the body really has nothing to do. The physiology of the body has nothing to do with your essence as a person.
Right. The the intelligence of the yes.
Yeah, and in fact, most of the clients I work with that are morbidly obese, they know everything about dieting and food and nutrition. I mean, they are obsessed, like they have never tried. They've tried everything, so they are experts. Yeah. They're experts on such, and not only that, but they pride themselves, so their shame is worse. They're more ashamed because they have worked so hard, so it's really wrong, like on so many levels. It's wrong, right? But but when you say to me, but Robin, no one's going to take me credibly, well, you're basically supporting the thin supremacy system. Then you're not speaking up,
Well, I am speaking up, but I'm recognizing that it exists. And I'm recognizing that it exists inside my head, and I know that that needs to get clear.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the shame. We could go back to when you were 270 pounds and how you got there, and it was full of shame about your weight. It takes a lot of shame to get that big.
That was me trying to push my husband away.
Well, and there was a lot of shame. Just go into the truth of that. And hiding and self-loathing. There's way more than just trying to push your husband away. Way more to it.
All right, well, I'm going to go into that, but
you need to.
Not on your time.
Well, no, you need to go into that, because that's how you understand. That's how you're going to understand why this has become more important than it should be. The weight loss stuff. Yeah, that might be what you're feeling up front. That might be the upfront emotion that you have about it. And you might have some martyr. A lot of times when people are martyrs.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I got tons and tons of martyrs.
Okay, that's why you're not getting what I'm saying. Because the martyr aspect of it is how you do. That's not the main thing. That's the surface of it. And you're not going beyond that. That martyr position, that is really toxic. You still have shame about it. You're just blaming him, or there's a lot of blame involved, And so,
I don't feel like I blame him. He was doing the best he possibly could, and I just didn't like him. So, but yeah, I mean, I definitely have martyr, and I definitely want to get underneath that. So,
okay, that's a big one. That's massive. Yeah. That I would say for all the people I've worked with, 100% have a martyr complex. And trying to compensate. Trying to be more self-sufficient. That self kind of, I need to be independent. So body image is an independent way to control, and no one's involved. But it's also a great way to get people, to feel independently valuable, even though you're completely following a program. So it's not really independent. I know I'm really being surface about some of this answer stuff, but we only have so much time to go over a lot of this work. So this is the work I do. Okay. And it's layers
I'm going to go back over it. And listen until I get it, and then we'll do another one.
Yeah, so what I would look at, let's go into that martyr complex. That's a big one. What that means is that you're relying on others a lot to fulfill you. And so typically that positions you to be a victim. I don't know your history or your story, so I'm generalizing this, okay? So just know so what happens when someone is a victim is you are saying that I am powerless. and this happened to me, and I couldn't handle it.
I feel more like this happened to me, so that's how I handle it.
This happened to me, and I was powerless, or I couldn't handle it, so I used this tool to handle it. Yeah, so compensating.
Yeah, I guess it was more like I didn't feel victimized. I felt like I chose this, and I can't. So my history was you don't get divorced.
Got it. Because that's a cardinal sin. That's like you don't have sex before marriage, and it is dogma. So that's dogmatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, brainwashing.
And I didn't, and then I got married, and then you don't get divorced. So yeah, so that's it. I mean, that's a piece of it. It was like my way out is to die. So I'm going to die by eating.
Yeah, because it's okay, but hold on, there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it, but I can tell that's what you're aware of. So never get divorced. So it was never really a good relationship anyways.
I don't even know how to answer that. But it had its moments.
So were you not so why were you trying to end your life? Like, what was so bad? It had to have been that bad, right? If it is the marriage. Or was it everything? Was it just yourself?
So I married a man with Asperger's, and we met when I was 18, and I had no idea what Asperger's was.
Got it.
I figured he was going to grow up, and he never did. And he still hasn't, and I'm 50. So,
okay. Got it.
Yeah, I began to feel like I'm his mother.
Okay,
and
so
I
okay.
really didn't want to be in a relationship where I was married to my son. So.
Got pause, because right there, and I'm not saying that's wrong what you just said, or that I'm just saying can you see where some of this I am powerless comes into it? I married a special needs person, and it isn't fulfilling me. And the fact that there is no possibility of divorce because, was that a religious belief?
Yes.
It's religious. So it's religious dogma. Dogma means it's not negotiable. So the definition of dogma is a belief or a set of beliefs given to you to follow without question from an authority. So it positions you immediately to be inferior. So you are inferior instantly in dogma, and you are to do what you're told. Very authoritarian. You are to do what we tell you. Okay? So that in and of itself is victimizing. You're powerless.
I agree. I
Okay?
agree.
So you're being basically held captive by the dogma. So in that situation, you got married, you mature, the husband is not maturing, and you end up being highly controlling. You probably were miserable, and maybe a wretched person too. Like, I could see myself becoming that in that environment. Because then you're bitter. You're bitter around, I'm basically married to someone who is just a child. And I cannot get out because of the dogma. There's no questioning the dogma. There is no arguing. You cannot question it. And if you do, you are a horrible person. So the way you get out is the healthy way to get out is to see that as dogma. That there's no grace in it. There's no lenience. There's no relativity in it. It's black or white, right?
Mm-hmm. Which is eventually what I did.
Eventually, correct. After you've been damaged, exactly. That's what happened to me too. I had mental illness until I figured it out. So now, on a side note, So before that, so you probably went down into a place of hopelessness. This is hopeless. Do you recall that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay. So
yeah, the thing that snapped me out of it actually was seeing it as dogma and seeing that I did not want to deliver that dogma to my children.
Yeah, and I love it. Well, yes, the kid factor comes in, and that is a big motivator for a lot of people. I'm going into your feeding behavior, the body image stuff. Okay, so I'm saying, okay, here's the dogma holding you captive. So you're not aware of it yet. You're just a slave to it. Your whole life is dedicated to staying within these boundaries. Even though within the boundary there's no joy, you're probably becoming a miserable person. Am I right? Okay, because I'm looking at going, oh, I would have been a wretched bitch. I'm just looking at my own humanness in that environment where you get bitter and short and your temper goes up and you have very little patience, right? Because you're victimized by it too. If you knew it ahead of time, let's just say the parents are like, yes, he has this, he's a good person, it would have been different. You might not have married him.
Yeah.
Right? Because you might have married him.
I would have gone into it knowing.
Well, and you might have married him knowing he was immature, but you thought he would change.
Yeah, I thought he was going to grow up just like everybody else does. Well, not everybody, but you know what I mean?
Like, okay, you're like, well, now that I know, not everybody else does. Totally. Okay. This is important. So before that, were you into your body image before? Did that play a part of your self-worth? Like, I look good, I'm hot, I'm thin. Was that there beforehand?
I don't think I ever really believed that I was hot and thin. And I remember a time in high school, like I was on the dance team, and I really was. Looking back, I really was.
Okay, but but being on the dance team, it is body image focused.
I was more interested in moving. I really didn't care what I looked like in high school, and maybe that was because I thought I looked fine, but it really didn't matter to me.
Okay.
I was playing.
Got it. Well, did you ever think, oh, that poor girl, she just needs to lose? Did you ever think that about someone else?
No.
Never. I mean, you bought it at some point.
Well, okay, so I'm looking at myself in high school, and I'm not seeing it there. Yeah. I don't think it was there.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah, I did. I wasn't like a superior person, but I always felt bad for people who were overweight. So I had bought it. Do you see how that's not, I'm not narcissistically saying I'm better than people, but I did feel sorry for people who were overweight. So that's still...
we didn't have very many overweight people in my high school, but I do remember feeling sorry for someone who was overweight because everyone was picking on her.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's good. So you were more concerned about her being picked on than the fact that she was overweight and had to deal with that. Like she...
Yeah, in high school. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you start, at some point in this process, what?
You asked the question and the answer just popped into my head.
What?
I remember the first time I was in college. And there was an early morning aerobics class, and everyone on my floor got up in the morning and went to the early morning aerobics class, and I didn't want to go. I was a dance major. I was already moving.
Yeah.
And somebody said, well, Pete's not going to like you if you don't keep your body nice.
Oh, and you believed it.
And I went, what? Yeah. I went, okay, I guess I got to go. And that was it.
My body's important. I have to look good.
Huh. That's fun.
Well,
thanks for that.
You're welcome. Well, these are important moments, like little spots where you're like, oh, I remember, and this was so passive. My mom weighing herself one day in the bathroom. I lived in this old Victorian house, and there was one huge bathroom, right? And I was in there, and she stepped on the scale and was like, oh, please don't be 150. If I'm 150 pounds, shoot me. And she was like 153. And she was like, oh, so upset about it. And then I was curious. And I got on the scale and I was over 150 pounds. In that moment, I was like, is there something wrong? Is that bad, Mom? And she was like, oh, no, no, no. And she kind of tried to back out of it. But how she felt about her weight impacted me. She didn't make me feel bad. It was how she responded to her weight that made me realize, well, weight's important. So those little tiny weird things, it's amazing. I remember that, right? You remembered that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they really do impact how you feel socially. All of a sudden, you're at risk to be abandoned if you're not hot, right? And the standard of attractiveness is severe. You could look at, you're a dancer in college and you better not look any different, you know?
Yeah.
That's a big deal. And so once those things become important, all of a sudden how you relate to the body changes. Now your body's threatening your tribal needs. That third hierarchy of need gets inflamed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now my body can threaten my sense of security. The way someone else's perception of my body can threaten my security. So I need to be concerned about how other people perceive me. And, you know, this is why we would gravitate to what's socially accepted in terms of body image. How do people do their hair? I'll do my hair like that.
Yeah.
You know, what's seen as attractive? I'm going to try to do that. So, so you got married. And when was the first time you tried to restrict food?
Actually, it was when I was 10, but didn't happen again until much later.
Why were you
college.
dieting at 10?
I had decided that, I had seen a picture of myself, and I didn't like the way it looked.
Interesting.
So,
at 10 years old, did your mother diet?
I don't remember. I don't think so. She's never been overweight.
Were you with friends that were really focused on their looks? I mean, you were a dancer.
Right, but not when I was 10.
But what was going on when you were 10? That would make you actually think that.
I don't even remember.
Don't.
I was.
Yeah.
So I had gone to visit my dad, who lived in another state, and he had a new wife, and she was this little teeny thing. Yeah, I just remember I went swimming with my cousin and my dad and my new stepmom, and I think I just decided that I wasn't going to eat for a little while, and I'm standing at the counter at the swimming pool, and I hear my cousin go, "She's going to faint," and then I said, "No, I'm not," and then I hit the ground because I had not eaten enough to pass out, and then I didn't do that again.
Interesting. Well, because you were a kid, but you did feel there was something wrong with the body at that time.
I did, huh?
Mm-hmm. When was the last time you thought about that?
Oh, I don't know. It's been years.
Long time. Okay, so then when did you start dieting after that? When was the next time you said, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to try to not gain weight, or I should really think about it? Yeah, at that time when you were starting to do aerobics and it became important?
Yep. Yep.
If you could go back to that point in time in your life, what would you tell yourself?
Well, my first response is don't eat carbs.
Oh my God. And how does that work out? You're about to get a lot bigger, a lot faster with that one. Danger! Food's dangerous! Don't eat it!
Yeah.
That's cruel. That would be really cruel to do that to anybody.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's terrible. very cruel over something like carbs. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Don't do that. And shame people for it. Try that.
Yeah.
So then, when did you start really gaining weight? Like really? Was it around the same time?
No, it was. I'm trying to look at myself. It's when I got married.
I wonder if that
I
time.
moved to California. We had this really great relationship with food and restaurants, and I mean we were in the Bay Area, and my husband was making in the early '90s over $100,000 a year. So I mean we had a good time.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the time, were you still dieting too? Kind of like, remember when I said, well, you're like, well, we'll do it now, and then I won't eat later, and then, well, we'll do it now, and then I'll go on a diet in January, and that's when people gain weight.
I'll diet tomorrow, but today I'm gonna have my sweet steak.
Yeah, and we're gonna go so you remember that's what we were talking about earlier, is that you're kind of like living in famine when and you're eating as if famine's on its way, as if you just ended famine.
You're looking at your plate and going, I gotta finish all this because tomorrow I'm not gonna get to see anything.
Yeah, so eventually you get really big, and at some point you felt bad about it. Yeah. So you did. So this is where when you said, "Oh, I'm doing it to," I'm victim, and I wanted to try to get out of that marriage. Well, that at some point became the story, but there's a lot more involved in that 270 pounds. There's a lot of dieting that went into it, a lot of shame that went into it. But then it probably became a great avenue as you learned to get out of the marriage, at some later point.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense now? Looking at it from a little bit underneath it, going underneath it a little bit.
Maybe. I'm going to look at it more. But yeah. The interesting thing was he didn't care.
Oh, well, he's not a thin supremacist. That's good. He still loved you. Yeah.
Yeah.
What if he did care?
I probably would have done it more if he didn't care.
Yeah. Just to give yourself a sense of autonomy from him.
A little passive aggressiveness. Yeah.
I'm hearing some narcissism in this. Did you ever connect?
You think?
Yeah, I was gonna say, have you connected those dots at all?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's like we all have aspects of that in our survival mechanism. Again, but if you're not in survival, you wouldn't have those symptoms. But someone who is in fight or flight and in a victim position, for sure. Sense of being superior. So anyways, you might be trying to recover from that marriage with your thinness too.
I think there's some of that, yeah.
Yeah, like I'm going to get back to what I think I should be. That way it's like redemption. It's like a form of redeeming yourself from it.
Yeah, a little baptism or something. I don't know.
Well, if you're angry,
it's bleeding over into my current relationship, and I'm not copacetic with that. So.
You mean what is?
That's sort of wanting to redeem myself, or wanting to cleanse myself from my marriage.
Yeah, got it.
Is bleeding over into, yeah.
Okay, so this might be where you have that there's resent for the body at this point. Do you have any resent? Do you get a sense of that? The body fat. I resent that time in my life. I hate it.
Oh, yeah.
Resent. So I have to It's like I need a new body.
Okay.
I want a brand new body because what I did and now I have to fix it. So part of it is you're trying to fix damages that you did. And you're kind of like overdoing it. That could be also an issue.
Okay.
Where it's becoming like, again, you're now stuck in this trap where it's like, okay, at some point I'll get that destination. And what you don't realize is you'll never hit it because the destination in your mind relieves you from all this work. Like it'll be relieved. I'll be relieved of it. But the work doesn't go away once you hit the destination because the destination requires the work. Did that make sense what I just said?
Yes, it does. I don't like it. It's pissing me off.
Right? I know. Yeah. But you know it's true. Can you not see that?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't, you're going to find out. I've never met someone, I've been in this for a long time. I've never met someone that got freedom from their thinnerness. Ever. They just they get trapped. Especially with this type of integrity, right? It's the integrity.
Do you feel like you got freedom?
Hell yeah, I've been free for 20 years. I'd rather be 500 pounds than where you're at right now. The body is not a problem to me. The state of mind you're in is worthy of suicide, in my personal opinion. It's bad. It's dark. I'd rather be morbidly obese. I mean, that's not a big deal. The psychology of what's going on is terrible. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemies. I wouldn't wish it on terrible, terrible people. It's that bad. But, with an open mind, even getting in a car wreck where you lose your limbs, let's say becoming a paraplegic, I can handle that. That's just a physicality that I can adapt around, right? So the body's physicality can be adapted around. The problem, too, for people who were morbidly obese is they were so full of shame and hatred around it that they think that that's what you would be going back to if you had to. And I'm not saying you have to, but when I say I'd rather be 500 pounds, a lot of people go, well, you're going to be living in hate and isolation because you're going to be embarrassed. Well, that's not what I'm saying, right? I wouldn't be embarrassed.
You're saying you've found your way through that and wouldn't need to be embarrassed.
I wouldn't care.
You don't find a program.
Correct. Yeah. It's like I said, I could be a paraplegic. I could lose my legs. I could handle it. I'd find a whole avenue of life without legs. Because it's just a physicality. It's just a physicality. It doesn't change the essence of my intelligence or my consciousness. It doesn't change my awareness. It doesn't change my love for, nature. It doesn't change any of those actual truthful aspects of what brings me joy. It doesn't take any of that away. Right? So the freedom I got was 20 years ago, fully in complete recovery. But it took a out of body experience, near death, and I was right before suicide attempt. So it was bad. Wow. I was in a bad place, around my body image. But it's and I'm not saying that's where you're at, that's where I was. To where that's how bad it was, to where I'd either commit suicide or be 500 pounds. I don't ever want to do that again. I don't want to have to work out and obsess about food 24/7. I don't want it. That's not life. That's like slavery. And it's intense slavery because of how it's impacting that survival mechanism with food. So you're stuck in it permanently unless you're willing to die, because that whole entire area of the brain becomes hijacked. Like addiction.
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrible. And the binging is terrible. I used to binge up to 12, 15 times a day. 8 was the average.
Wow.
Yeah, so you see why I'd rather be fat?
So you don't have to do that anymore?
Oh, thank God, right? No. I gave that up 20 years ago. Why would you go back? It's like divorce, right? Imagine would you just, I guess I'll go back to my ex-husband. Does that sound appealing to you? That's how I feel about body image. I'm like, yeah, no, never. I'll never do that again. You're chasing a fantasy. It's like a mirage. Sucks. And you don't really get freedom. You just get, it just takes over your thought process. You know, it gets worse. The more you need the thinness, the worse it gets. You know, there's always a balance point some people make and can get, but they still have to devote their everything to it. And it's, I don't know, you have to really open your mind to a holistic life perspective around what life's about. Is this what you're supposed to be doing? Is the body meant to be obsessed over? You know, millions of years of evolution, and we have to still micromanage what we're doing with it. You know, can you rely on your evolution? Can you rely on genetics and DNA? And the fact that your body is here today means you came from a family line of DNA that works. You know, if it didn't, you would have died. This line would not be here today. Would have gone out 2,000 years ago or so. You know what I mean? Survival of the fittest. You clearly have some fit genes. It's just you live in a dogmatic society around body image, and you haven't questioned that one yet. You've questioned religion.
Well, I have questioned it a little bit, and it's honestly starting to really tick me off when people are starting to comment on my weight loss. They're like, oh, I can't believe how good you look. I can't believe how amazing you look. And I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. It's like,
well, that also puts pressure on you to keep performing. There's a lot of sides to that one. Now there's pressure, and that actually can create more binging in response, especially if you can't hold the restrictions. You'll end up overeating. And then you go back into the shame cycle, which is the cycle where people get, it's not good. The shame side of it is the side where you feel hopeless, out of control. That's the binging side of it. I have seen the HCG protocol do that to a lot of people who prior to were stable, right? Someone would come, yeah. So you're close. If you can't tell, this could trigger some nasty shit. It can resurface. Resurfacing it. That means it's still there. You just repressed it, right?
Okay.
With your food issues.
Well, if it resurfaces, then I want to work through it.
Well, that would be the goal. And
so far,
and you kind of want it to resurface. I don't know about you, but you want it to resurface if that shit is still there. You know?
Well, sure, because I don't want to keep playing yo-yo games.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to keep doing that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do remember when I was in high school and I was just there. I was playing. I was being here.
Yeah,
the
authentic.
Body that I had, and it was lovely. And so maybe that's like the image that I have of myself. Like I need to get
there
to where I look like that,
yeah.
and then I can feel like I can just drop it all. I don't know.
Yeah, that I think you probably hit the target right with that right there. That could be it. You are attaching that freedom to the body image, not realizing that at the time you didn't care about your body image. That's where the freedom was. But so the question is, can you get that freedom caring about your body image?
I guess not.
Well, because if you...
the freedom was the absence of it.
Yeah, the freedom was the absence of it. I need you to think that again. Do it like 3 times so that you can connect the dots with that. Oh, it's not the image. It's the absence of the image. So everything I do with people is to get rid of that image. And I have clients who are 400 pounds I got to do this with. It's amazing when they do it. Because they feel, well, first of all, they go through stages of grief. Look what I've done.
Yeah.
Thinking I was going to lose it. You know, and accepting the damages. There's irreparable damages to that. And then to give themselves grace. I mean, there's layers of work that goes on. But I have a client right now who is completely, totally recovered, and she's 340 pounds. She's like, I'd rather be fatter than to go back in that. That was horrible.
Nice.
It's huge. She's in that space of freedom, even though she's 350 pounds. because it's detached from body image. But for years she chased when I'm thinner, when I'm thinner, when I'm thinner. When I'm thinner. And your whole life is on pause. You're basically on pause, living frantically. It's like paralysis. You're paralyzed by all the work you're trying to do, and oftentimes it's overwhelming. You know.
No, I've been there.
Yeah, so
I don't feel like I'm there now. I feel like I've gotten to a point where I am not embarrassed about myself.
Yeah, I love that.
But I've spent so many years there.
Yeah. Oh, that's an apathy. That is a horrible place. That's a terrible place.
Not going to high school reunions. Don't want to go see. Don't want anyone who knew me then to see me now.
See me now, I'm embarrassed.
No, yeah.
Okay, remember the shame I was telling you earlier that you're like, no. Remember when I said that takes a lot of shame and hiding?
Yeah, that's the shame.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay.
Takes a lot of shame to get that big. A lot. It's so sad too. I mean, think about that. How much shame that you carried and it's dogma shame.
Yeah.
Within supremacy. And there's no grace for this whole situation. I mean, if you wrote a book, I mean, think of your perspective around how this happened. How 270 pounds happens. It's not what people think. It's not the ignorance around it. It was just so ignorant. Someone sees someone who's 270 pounds and they'll say she's lazy. That is just so dumb. It's just like, yeah, and you're special. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. You know, not to say there aren't people.
There's a lot of things, but lazy isn't one of them.
I know. Yeah, but that's what someone would stigmatize you with because of their own, because they're ignorant. They're just total ignorance out there with their thin supremacy, not realizing it's typically the opposite, and it's an extreme opposite of what you just said. So, to look back and see that, it's like, sad. It's a sad thing. And the good news is you're out of that. You're at least in the upper stages. So there's one scientist who studied consciousness. He's now passed away, but he studies human consciousness, and he's created a scale of consciousness. And the lower scales of consciousness are the survival states. And he split them up into basically two. There's the low, which is in fight or flight. Those are the people in flight, hiding. They don't feel capable. They're in hopelessness. They're in paralysis. That's where you were. The upper states of survival mode are the fighters. They at least have more energy. They have more confidence in what they're doing, but they're still in survival mode. They're still in a lower state of survival. They're just not in the apathy state. Right? So you're out of apathy and you're up into actual fighting, which is better. Okay. Right? It's better, but it still sucks. I'm just going to put that out there. Who read
that? Who are you referencing?
Dr. David R. Hawkins. He blows my mind. He's very heady, very hard to understand, but I love his work. I study his work just because he's done such an amazing job describing consciousness and his map of consciousness. The lower states. Shame is the lowest. Shame, apathy, guilt, fear, anger. And then there's there's a pride, where you inflate yourself. Goes through all those lower states of consciousness. Pride would be the narcissistic stage, where you are inflating yourself to survive. You're not really surviving though. It's kind of like the animals that inflate and poof themselves up to be bigger than they actually are. So it's like trying to create a persona that is above and beyond your reality. And someone who does that has to defend themselves all the time. They have to constantly prove themselves because they're personifying themselves as bigger and better than they truly are. And they can be convinced that they're as big as they think they are, but then in reality they struggle, and because they have to maintain their persona of bigger than they are. The inflated idea, they blame other people. They go into victim positionality, that's a form of blaming. So you're in that, I would say you're probably trapped in those pride at times, and in anger. And you might probably go, and we go up and down these scales. That's what he talks about. He's like, you're not always just in one place, especially if you're in those lower states of survival. You can go from pride to shame in 2 seconds. Inflated high sense of yourself, and then down into shame and hiding. You know, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, that's what you were kind of describing there. It's like, now I'm just trying to get back. And you might be doing that to try to prove to yourself and others. And so when someone says, wow, you look amazing, what that feels like to someone who is in it is pressure. It feels like pressure. You're getting all sorts of validation from thin supremacy. You're superior now. Oh, you're looking like a better person. You are a better person now. That part's going to piss you off. There's that part.
Yeah.
You're like, you know what? I'm the same person, and all of a sudden you think I'm great. That's the reality of thin supremacy. But there's the pressure too, because if you've proven you're this way, you have to keep this now, to keep this approval, to prove that you have what it takes. So what do you think that does to your relationship with food?
That's all the things that I've been trying to undo.
Yeah, it pressurizes it. Because food now is more threatening. If you have to keep your weight loss to prove your value. Do you see how that makes food even more threatening? Needs to be more controlled. Needs to be more. So now you're in like sketchy zone, sketchy animal zone with food. Very primal state. And eventually it can feel like sucky, especially when you're surrounded by a reality that's abundant. So it becomes more strict and claustrophobic as that happens. So be prepared for that. This part you might not have experienced yet. What I'm describing, you might not have experienced this yet. When I say to you, you're chasing a mirage, when you get there, first of all, you're never really going to appreciate it because it's still body. You're oriented to look at the body as something that's not good enough. And even when you're physically changing, your brain is still oriented. It's an emotional state of it's not good enough. So the physicality of the body isn't going to change that emotional way of looking at it. It's not a physical problem. It's an emotional way of looking at it. So this is why a lot of people who lose a significant amount of weight, they see they look smaller, but they still feel fat because they can feel it. They still have the emotional feeling of inferiority around it. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. So they never really. Oh yeah, I mean it's a positionality. They're positioned they're in one way, and then even if they're aware I am thin enough, they have to keep it now. They cannot. They have to defend it. So the psychology gets worse because you become more paranoid, shifty eyes. I mean, and again, like I said, what that does with your relationship with food is it pressurizes it even more. So now you got to do more exercise. So now you're you're in a trap. You're now an indentured servant to protecting what gold you think you got, right? And that's when people get bad. I mean, it's dark. You're thin, but no one really knows how dark it is. They're like, oh my God, you look amazing. It makes me so happy. And they don't realize that you're not doing well. Obsessive compulsive about it. And it hijacks your purpose. So that freedom doesn't exist because you have to maintain it now. Because if you take pride in it, so let's say you take pride in the weight loss and people are like, oh my God, you look amazing. And you're taking some pride in that, you're going to have to defend it.
Well, I'm feeling like all the work that I did for a couple of years before I started doing the HCG got me to a point where it's pretty effortless for me to maintain weight.
Okay, have you added the fact? Okay, so you're using the effortlessness with the weight you were before and how you perceived it and how you held yourself socially with it. Okay, so there's a context of how you hold yourself in that space. So what I want you to be aware of, if I can give you any forewarning or look at it from here, so let's prevent maybe some issues, is to look at it remove any pride you get from being thinner. Any I'm amazing. You got to get rid of that. I'm assuming the weight that you easily maintained was still to you overweight.
Well, so far, because in my adult life, I have had excess body fat.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, that gives you grace. I don't know if you think about it this way, because there's no pressure yet. It's kind of like saying, well, I've already failed, so I have the lenience of this failure. I don't have to perform for anybody. So it gives you a little bit more lenience. So imagine if you get down to where you feel like you have to perform. You haven't experienced that yet. My hope would be that you yeah, because that's what'll happen. And this is where I've seen the protocol become very dangerous for people, especially people with this type of, if you're attaching, like, I'm proving myself, I'm ridding myself from my old, mistaken life. I want to start over. I want to do over. I'm going to push the refresh button. I'm going to get a new hard drive. What's going to happen is you're going potentially, okay, just feel this out. Just feel and see if this exists in you. Because if it does, you're going to want to know. If in any way you get narcissistic gratification, that's that survival gratification. Like I'm proving myself type of feeling in it. Imagine when you lose that weight, what you're going to have to do to keep it off.
That's not ringing true for me yet. And it might later.
Yeah.
But right now it's not.
Okay, well if there's anything I can probably suggest, then it's just don't put any pride in it. Don't attach your self-worth to it. You want to kind of be here nor there about it. Like, it's not a big deal. You want to you want to be indifferent about your weight. Indifference.
Okay.
Write that word down. The goal is to be indifferent about my weight. It's here nor there, because you're intrinsically self-sustained. It's not a physical sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'm a good person, whether I'm fat or thin. None of this matters. It's an illusion.
In your experience, what is the best way to use BHCG? Like, when is it a good time to use it, and when is it not time to use it yet?
That's a great question. At this point in all the work that I've done, it should not be used for people who have body image issues. It is not for your emotional and your psychological way for you to feel better about yourself, right? This is a medical procedure. So when someone is doing it to improve their self-esteem, they are terrible candidates because they're more likely to have eating issues when it's over. It's terrible. It's actually quite dangerous for people like that. I would say if I were to readdress Weight Loss Apocalypse, I would have a huge warning. I would have an entire chapter devoted to people who have these issues should not come close to the protocol. It is inflaming. It's enraging. It is triggering. You will have binge eating issues if you have any of this under there, they're going to come back. And it only comes back as you get leaner and leaner and leaner. Things get worse and worse and worse, right? So it's a medical procedure for people who are in a psychological and emotional state to be able to handle and be indifferent about the physical outcome. The goal is to be indifferent about the physical outcome. Think of it like if you were to get like a kidney transplant. Okay. I teach it like this. Imagine you are giving a kidney to a loved one, whether it's a sister, your parent, or your child. And the doctor said, you need to do this protocol first. We're going to go through surgery, and then you transition into the next phase afterwards. You'd be pretty indifferent about the weight loss, don't you agree? Because that's how you should be on the protocol. You need to be super indifferent about the physical outcome. And then after the fact, we don't really understand how the body has resolved or if it worked until you get back into reality. You can't say the protocol works if everybody who does it has to be anorexic afterwards to maintain their weight loss. That it doesn't work. The point is that it actually, if it's medically done and medically supervised and done for the purpose of it, the endocrine system, the weight is just a fraction of how the body is manifesting what's happened. I mean, people can feel after they do it, they can gain all the weight back, but they notice their energy is better, they're sleeping better, they have all these other symptoms that are now gone, even if they didn't really lose that much weight. So it still worked, right? But because it's been prostituted as a diet for weight loss so you can feel better about yourself, it's just ruined the whole thing and made it a danger. So I do quite a bit of work with people. Like the client I have who's 350 pounds, she just fully recovered. Do you think she's going to jump into the protocol anytime soon? No.
No, probably not, because unless she's got an endocrine imbalance, why would she do that?
She probably does. She's 350 pounds. Why would she do that psychologically? She's been dieting for decades. Why would you jump into the protocol right away? So she's taking time to live in reality free. You know that feeling you said about being free when you were in high school? She's living there right now.
Okay. Well, it's a lovely place.
It is awesome place. She's in that space, and why would I even recommend the protocol? That would not be good. So and at this point, if she's living that way, what do you think is going to naturally happen to her body now that she's not paying attention to it?
Well, then she's going to allow it to regulate itself.
Yep. And it'll probably do quite a bit of healing on its own. Just getting her ego out of it, right? So it's a process. And to me, it's like, okay, I have another client who I've been working with for a few years, and she's done the protocol totally fine. Totally fine, totally capable, has her, she has rheumatoid arthritis. She has some inflammatory symptoms. In the protocol, the removal of food, it goes away. Or it's not she has it more so on the protocol than when she's off the protocol. The arthritis flares up. Even though she's eating less than 500 calories, it really helps us looking at it from a diagnosis point of view. It's like the food isn't the cause of her rheumatoid arthritis. Because when she's on it, so it's been really eye-opening for her to look at it from a medical perspective, where her weight is absolutely has nothing to do with why we're doing it. We don't care about her weight. We don't monitor her weight. It's like this has nothing to do with your weight. I repeat that in Weight Loss Apocalypse so much. And people just go whoop in one ear and out the other. That's an obvious side effect.
It's so exciting to think that I could actually, you know what I mean.
Yeah, but
I like how I feel when I'm on HCG because I can think.
Well, there's not just that, but you're also getting you're getting fed the thinnerness. I mean, there's so much that people get out of it that we don't know what it is that's doing what it is. But when people are weighing themselves all the time, that's a sign it's not just the HCG or the balancing of the protocol. There's a lot more. They're bringing their mental case to the game. And the protocol is euphoric for people. Crazy, addictive, euphoric for a lot of people. That's another part.
I wouldn't say I feel like it's euphoric. I would just say that my brain functions better and more clearly.
Yeah, it could be the nice controlled environment too, because it's super controlled.
Maybe. I don't know. Whatever it is.
Well, it's not in reality.
My brain is
that's for sure.
No,
yeah.
But in order to keep that brain clarity for me, I have to stay ketogenic.
Oh, that is so shitty for you. That means you're super inflamed. That means you're not really, it's not working. That's what I meant. Like, the protocol's not working. If you have to stay on a ketogenic diet, it doesn't work. It didn't work.
Well, I keep hoping that at some point, my body is going to eventually get to a point where that's not necessary anymore.
No.
But I just feel like I've been so horrible to it that it needs a break. It needs a rest.
Yeah, that ketogenic diet, I'm telling you, if you have to do that, you are super not healthy. Does that make
Well,
sense?
I would agree.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to do that.
Wants me on the HCG
Yeah, the goal is that with every client,
it will get me to a point where I'm not so inflamed.
no, and that right there is just naive. It doesn't work like that.
Okay.
Because you're starving your system. You're literally starving to some degree. It doesn't get the variety. You're not getting variety, so you're not really testing your endocrine system. See, that tells me it's all based on weight outcome. It's all focused on how much you weigh as a guide. You got to get that out of it. So every client I work with, the goal is that you do not go back into any form of restriction. That's the only way to know what the protocol's doing. And you have to kind of let go of the whole concept of weight to really understand it. You might lose 30 pounds on the very low calorie protocol and gain back 15, but after you gain back the 15, eating like a normal human being, that's when you actually go in and do the hormone testing and see what happened. Not when you're on a ketogenic diet. That's fake. It's like you're still trying to mess with your system with restrictions. You're not getting a real outcome of the protocol. This is where when I talk to doctors and they get it, they go, "Oh my God, how did I not see that?" It's just a little bit of education in there for people to see it. It's like you can't really know what's going on until you have an equal comparison from before to after. So what I do with clients now is we focus, first of all, we work a lot on these issues that that are underneath body image problems. Once that's done, the goal is that they live in this freedom. Kind of like that client I had. She's eating to hunger. It's super easy. It was hard before. Click. It's super easy for her now. She has no issues with food. And let her body adjust to that, right? And then as her body adjusts to that and it becomes normal, so she's eating to hunger, she's eating freely, she's eating a diverse amount of food. Over time, as her body stabilizes, that's when you do blood work. Then you do a round of the protocol. Then they transition off and they go back to eating the same way they were before, eating to hunger, eating freely, pancakes, whatever it is. I mean, tacos, sushi, they're eating like a normal human being, okay? Then you redo the blood work because that's an equal comparison to the previous numbers. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're maintaining, if you have to do a ketogenic diet, it's not working. And we don't know if it worked. Because you're now...
Well, so maintaining a ketogenic diet, this is a thing that I did for a long time before I began doing my rounds on HCG. And I haven't been, so like I did my first round and then I did my break and then I did my second round and I just finished my second round. So it's like I haven't been doing it long enough to know whether or not, because I'm in maintenance.
Yeah, and if you've been, eating that way, which is a diet, it's a restrictive diet, you're going to be scared to go back to reality. I mean, be realistic. I have to be realistic with everybody that comes to me. It's like if I have someone who's been deathly afraid to have sugar, it's not going to be easy for them to reintroduce it until we deal with the underlying issues they're afraid of, emotionally. So, I don't know. You have to be realistic with yourself.
As I finished this last round and I did my 3 weeks maintenance and then I ate normally for another 3 weeks before I started the round, and one of those weeks was a vacation week. And you asked me if I binged, and I guess that wasn't a binge, but eating normally, like boyfriend wanted to go have hot dogs, we went and had hot dogs. We ate whatever it was we wanted to eat. I didn't gain weight.
Yeah, were you were eating
when I started my next round.
Yeah, did you eat to hunger?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the goal would be that you have a sustained amount of time so the body actually is adapted to it. So if you only took a 3-week break, that's like, that's super quick. That's not a good time, So you won't really know until you're actually living in a normal environment for 3 to 4 to 8 weeks, to where the body it's maintaining itself. There's no outside influence whatsoever involved. So the ketogenic diet is an outside influence. It's under influence. It's not. You wouldn't be a good candidate for, let's just say.
It's what I use in those 3 weeks after coming off of HCG.
Yes, well that's part of the protocol. That 3 weeks, that's part of the transitioning into reality. So the goal is that you are in reality, eating to hunger without shame, without guilt, and that you are okay if the body regains weight, no stress. So if you stress about that, You're basically influencing your hormones negatively, making it worse. You're magnifying the negativity of it, which makes it worse.
Okay.
All right, dearie, I gotta go.
Yeah, you do. Thank you for all of this amazing time. And